All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm DW Hits with Fedowar Press, and we are here today talking with Eric Lahti. Eric was a contributor for our Bounties, Beasts, and Badlands Weird West anthology. And we are here tonight to explore some of the things that he's been up to and talk about him and his writing. So, Eric, will you introduce yourself for us?
Hi, I'm Eric Lahti. I've been the author of several books. I started in, I think, 2013 with Henchmen, and that one was fairly well received. And it was originally supposed to be just a standalone story, and it wound up getting two sequels. And there's a fourth one that I need to do to end the series that I've been telling myself I need to work on for like almost, 6 or 7 years now. And then always something comes up in the middle, and I never get around to doing that last story. But I've started it and stopped it at least 4 or 5 times, so I'm moving in the general direction. I mostly write in urban fantasy, although my current work in progress is science fiction, which has been a lot of fun to explore. In my opinion, really, the fundamental difference between the two is urban fantasy has magic and science fiction has technology. So there's a lot of similarities between the two, but I've been having a lot of fun working on my first science fiction story. I work as a programmer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I study martial arts. Uh, there's probably other stuff to say that is slipping my mind right now. It was all in there until the camera came on, and then everything vanished as these things are wont to do.
That's always how it works, isn't it?
It is. It's
Well,
like
we'll
when
be here for a while, so shout them out to me if as they come up.
right on.
Okay, so for Bounties, Beasts, and Badlands, you wrote this short story called Red.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about that story and how you got the idea for that.
Well, you had said you wanted something about the Weird West, and living in Albuquerque, I'm like right in the middle of the Weird West. We just don't have necessarily the Old West vibe. We have the New West vibe, which is meth and fent and shootings on the freeways, and it's just kind of it's a crazy town sometimes. Fun fact: I don't know if anybody has seen Breaking Bad. We
Mm-hmm.
lived right around the corner from Walter White's house, and so while the show was still being shot, up until about the third or fourth season, we really had no idea what was going on. We just would see all these camera trucks out there, and we'd drive by and be like, hi, how's it going? And it was only later as we started watching the show that it was like, wait a minute, that's Walter White's house. It's right around the corner from us. And Saul Goodman's law firm was just up and around a little bit. And so, when they first put up the big thing that they had on top of it, we were just kind of like, what the hell is going on here? Again, like no idea that Breaking Bad was happening. But once we finally started watching it, it was like, oh, dude, that's like half a mile from my house. And so, we're stuck right in the middle of Breaking Bad. And crazy as Breaking Bad is, it's pretty much Albuquerque in a nutshell. It's a fairly wild town. So anyway, back to Red. I live up fairly close to the Sandias. And so out and back, we walk quarter mile from the house, half mile from the house, and boom, you're in the open space. And it's just like Albuquerque stops. And you're out in the middle of cholla and other types of cactus and scrub brush, mountain lions, and all kinds of other fun stuff. So I was kind of thinking, this would probably be an ideal place for something weird to happen. And, Albuquerque has its own fair share of weirdness. So I just kind of put everything together and took, a lot of the high tech that we have running around up here, because we do have things like Sandia National Labs and the Air Force Research Laboratories, and a lot of extremely, extremely high technology that happens. And then we've also got, the low tech kind of crazy stuff that goes on. So I kind of figured it would be kind of fun to mix those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't originally, when I started writing Red, entirely certain where I was going to go to. I just knew that I liked the idea of walking along one of those trails out behind my house up to a Bruja's house. And I thought that would be kind of cool. And then as the story evolved, and it kind of goes back and forth a little bit between the past and the present, I thought, well, let's put all this stuff together and see what happens when the end times really come. And everybody gives it their all and loses. So it's probably not the most uplifting story in the group, but it is Albuquerque. So that's where I kind of came from with that whole thing.
Nice. Well, I enjoyed it a lot. I can definitely see those influences in there. So tell me about what you're working on now.
What I'm working on now is it's basically a Lovecraft story set in space. And
Hmm.
originally, I had the idea of you take a look at the Elder Gods and what's going to happen when people run into them in the far future. And it morphed quite a bit over time as these things happen. So it all takes place on an abandoned alien space station, and it's basically about a hacker, a woman deletes herself one night, just blows her brain out, but doesn't hurt herself. She just wipes her consciousness, and there's a guy that happens to be on there, and he's about to get killed by the local Bratva, which is the Russian mafia, or what they would evolve to in the future. And so he gets a chance to try and figure out what happened. So he goes to sleep one night and he wakes up in her body, and he has to figure out, track back her traces and talk to her friends and figure out exactly why she deleted her mind. And there's a lot of things that happen in both human and alien virtual reality, as well as this mysterious object that all of the station and its sister stations are orbiting, and nobody really knows what the hell it is. So that's been a lot of fun to write, and it's definitely got the Lovecraftian influence with kind of the cult running around in the background and all of the mysterious things that are going on. It just happens to take place on an alien space station, and
Oh,
so
that's really cool.
building up the relationship between where humanity is now and where the aliens were then is kind of fun, especially since traditional alien stories. Whenever humans meet aliens, we're like horrendously outgunned and out-teched, and that's not necessarily the case this time. We've actually progressed a little bit further from where they were, and we, had they still been around, probably would have been able to hold our own or beat them in a fight, provided, of course, they didn't launch their final little tactic, which is what the story's about. So it's been kind of a fun story to explore.
Yeah, that sounds super cool.
And
Yeah, I'll be interested in reading that when you get it all done and ready to go out the door.
it's a mess right now, but eventually it will be done. It's probably, I think, even if you took all of the stuff I'd already excised out of it, it's got to be at least 160,000 words long, which
Mm.
is far too long. And so I managed to cut, 45,000 words out of it, and it's still pretty big. So I'm gonna have to go through and trim it all down and get it nice and neat and tidy, and have a good punch to it, and really
Mhm.
sit down and explore the themes that I've been working with, which are a lot about culture and how different people react when they're in different cultures. So that's been kind of
Mhm.
another fun thing to explore.
All right, very cool. Very cool. Now, what exciting things are going on in your future?
Well, in the future, I've got to get that book out, and I've got to finish. Well, the one I started writing last year is actually done, and it's about a pair of people who, in the 1950s, wind up in a small town in New Mexico, and one of the guys was a government agent who was sent there to test Nazi magic, and they find this place that's just like out in the ass end of nowhere, which is really most of New Mexico, and something goes wrong, and so he tries to sacrifice this girl to kickstart the magic, but something else happens, and they both wind up stuck in a time field until 2018, and when they wake up, and so that's what 60 some odd years later, and one of them can fly and is basically a government version of Superman, and the other has like these tremendous psychic powers. So they're superheroes, but they really have absolutely no idea what's going on, and they don't really
Mhm.
want to deal with this. And so you've got people from the government end trying to track them down and saying, "Wait a minute, that whole project happened and it was real. We better figure out what the heck is going on." And then you've got the people that were moving in to try and kick the whole thing off, and then another group that's out there with their own reasons for doing things. And so,
Mhm.
as I was telling you before the show, I mean, most of the story is there, but there's not a whole lot of tension, and it's really hard to ratchet up tension when you've got somebody who can fly and is super powerful, because you can't really put him into a lot of bad situations because he'll just leave. And then the woman, who can just control people's minds, it's really hard to put her in a bad situation because she'll just convince them all that it's time to go. So I need to really probably go back to some of my old comic books and see how they handled it there, put all that back together. And I did have a book release last week. It's 99 cents right now on Amazon if anybody's interested. It's called Better Than Dead. And it's about a gunslinger who was trained by this ascetic. And he's just was an amazing gunfighter, the kind of person that can shoot the wings off of a fly sort of thing. But it all takes place in a city where monsters came out of the woodwork at one point. And the first one was a vampire who'd been captured and tortured. And in order to escape the problem, he showed up at the police station one day. And so after he did that, others started popping out. And so now you got a city full of vampires and there are werewolves and there's all this kind of background cultural tension. And as you can imagine, there would probably be plenty of people that would say, well, you're not a real human and therefore we don't really trust you. So society kind of holds people down. And in the midst of all of this, someone else has figured out how to kill people and raise them from the dead and use them. And she can basically just completely take control of their heads and uses them to just cause chaos around the city. So there's a lot of interplay between, it doesn't matter how good you are with a gun when you've got 30 people you can't kill coming after you. And so that was an awful lot of fun to write that one. And I'm really hoping it does well. Got my fingers crossed for the Netflix series, just like everybody else who's ever written a book.
Well, it sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And for everybody watching, Eric's information is in the description of the video here. You can go ahead and click on the links to go to his site or his social media and tell us the name of the book again.
Which one? The one that was just released?
The new one that just came out?
Better Than Dead. And there should be a link pinned to my Twitter profile. Take you right to Amazon, and my publisher put it for 99 cents, at least for today. I don't know how much longer that will last. So get in there quick. Get your copy. Yeah. And that is it's an awesome, fun book. All kinds of crazy things that can go wrong with magic, like cursing bullets, making drugs that are magically enhanced, gangs that are running and controlling wizards. So it's a blast, and it's something that I'm looking forward to exploring in the next book.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us about some of your other books.
Well, the first one was Henchman, and that was just one of those that I had this idea one night, and I was sitting there and I was playing, what was it? I think Saints Row 3 for like the 17th time. And I was like, man, I got to do something other than this. And so I had this idea popping around in the back of my head of, if you were a supervillain, why would you hire a bunch of incompetent henchmen? It's stupid. So I had this idea of, well, what would happen if all of them were pretty good at what they did? And they had this idea that things just weren't working and they wanted to do something really nefarious. And so I brought in Eve, who is really she's the primary supervillain of the whole thing, largely because I think women really get short shrift in terms of supervillainy. It's like you can control plants or steal jewels. Eve wants to destroy the world, and she doesn't have any desire whatsoever to take it over or control it. She just wants to wipe it out. And she manages to find some really competent, like-minded people. And in the midst of everything, they come across a young woman, and for whatever reason, goodness in their hearts, it said, let's find out what's going on with this chick. And that leads them on this just kind of wild chase through underground, top secret projects and all over Albuquerque, and even has a little scene in a bar that I used to live next to called the Copper Lounge. And I don't think the Copper Lounge is there anymore, which is unfortunate because it was a pretty cool bar. But yeah, it's just set in and around Albuquerque, and it's a great fun story. I haven't had a whole lot of complaints from anybody who's read it over the past however many years that is. Like, gosh, I guess probably coming up on 10 now. And then that one was followed up with Arise, which was part 2 to that, and then finally Transmute, which really just expanded the mythology and gave them something other than their original plan. The fun part about Henchmen was trying to come up with something that they were going to try to do that like the regular criminal isn't going to do. Like, your average criminal is going to go out and knock off a pawn shop or hold up a subway or something. So it had to be something big, but it couldn't be something stupid like take over the world. And had to be something that at least people would look at and go, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I can kind of see where you're coming. And, they were trying to kill Congress is really what it came down to. And especially in 2013, that was during one of the government shutdowns, and everybody was looking at everything that was going on in the U.S. Congress and saying, you guys are just worthless. And so it was a relatively straightforward path to say, well, let's go ahead and, just wipe out Congress, which, by the way, it's just fiction. If you don't like your Congress critter, vote them out. That's what we have elections for. But the whole thing goes completely awry on them, and they wind up in a much, much worse situation than they ever expected to be. Also, let's see, recent release, Roadside Attractions, about a woman who gets killed in the first 6 pages, and her ghost gets confined to a convenience store in Dragoon, Arizona. And it's got a brewing civil war coming up out of hell, and she's one of the linchpins. And a pair of ghost hunters get called in to track her down ostensibly. They're the other linchpins to the whole story. And the whole thing just goes crazy. That was another one that was a lot of fun to write. And if you've ever been down on I-10 in Arizona, for like 100 miles in either direction of this place, there are all of these gigantic billboards that say, what is the thing? And there's a convenience store, and it's also a museum. And one of the key things that they have is this mummy holding a baby. And that is the thing. And apparently it was created by some Hollywood special effects wizard back in the 40s, I think. But I was looking at that, and, every time I go by them, I was always like, man, how fun would it be if that thing was real? And it was something that no one expected it to be. And so that's where Roadside Attractions came from. That, and I was listening to Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast on the way home one day, and I was like, there's a really good story floating around in here. So those two kind of combined, and you wind up with hell brewing in Dragoon, Arizona, a population of like 200. And it all centers around this tiny little convenience store that has a museum that has the thing in it. Of course, I didn't get to call it the thing, which is sort of a pity, but I think I called it the Terror. And it's all the same kind of stuff.
No, that's super cool. I love those confluences of ideas that really just make a story pop.
All right. Just pop up out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, wow. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Okay. And so other than that, I'm trying to think. Maybe I've got a handful of short stories floating around. Obviously, I've got Red. I've got a collection of short stories called The Clock Man, which is 5 or 6 short stories, and then one novella revolving around a place called Aluna, which is run by magic. And the guy that runs and controls all the magic is called the Clock Man. And I got that name from the clock cycles that electrical signals use. And so we were down at the PNM Museum. It's a public service company of New Mexico, and they had this antique clock that they used to keep track of exactly how did the generators work. And so it's this clock cycle thing, and you see that in CPUs now. And I was like, hey, that'd be kind of interesting to see, what would happen if one person was really in charge of all of this and then he lost his damn mind. And so that's where the Clock Man came from. And Greetings from Sunny Aluna, which is my least well-received book ever. I think like 4 people have read it. Was a direct follow-on to that one. And that was actually, it was a fun story. It probably could be tightened up a little bit.
I always think this are interesting, which stories get traction and which stories don't. Yeah. Because I think so many of us have these really strong stories, and the hardest part often is getting them in front of the correct reader.
Right. Yeah, I like to think someday somebody's going to read Greetings and be like, wow, this is cool. Probably not going to happen, but if it did, it would be really awesome. And then, see the story really take off. I think would be an awful lot of fun.
Well, all of that sounds fantastic, and you have links to all of these either through your Twitter or through your Amazon. Once I get over, drive over to Amazon.
Yep, they're all on my Amazon page. I think I've got links to all of them on my website also, and
Mhm.
that's just over at ericlotti.com. No www, just straight up ericlotti.com, and that'll take you right to it. I do need to update it to get the link to Better Than Dead in there, but I'm lazy and haven't gotten around to doing that yet.
I know the feeling. I feel like I'm always behind on updating the websites.
Yeah.
Well, it's fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. And what's the best way for readers to find you? Is it social media? Is it your website?
My website has links to everything, including my blog. You
Mhm.
can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Eric Lotti author. I don't get into Facebook quite as much as I probably should. I'm mostly on Twitter, and you can find me there at Eric Lotti 1 and just
Mhm.
search for me, and I'm sure I'll pop up at some point. I also have an Instagram link or an Instagram profile at eric.a.lotti, and that's got a lot of things like pictures of my dogs and pictures of bicycles when I'm working on them, and then the odd little bit of marketing. That one's just a little bit more of like, oh, hey, that's interesting. Look, a roadrunner. Let's take a picture and put it up on Instagram.
Mhm. Local aesthetic.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's neat because so many of your books are in the Southwest there, and it's I think that's pretty neat how that aesthetic kind of weaves its way through so many of your narratives.
hmm you live here and you see it every day, and it's like, wow, I wonder what would that be like if that were to happen. So it's an interesting enough city that you can really take advantage of it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Eric.
Thank you very much, Dustin.
And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Like we said, please check out those links in the description, and you have a great day.